afternoon, and thank you so much to CAGP, Ruth, Paul, and the Planning Committee for inviting me to share as part of today's Frank Talks. My name's Tanya Rumble, my pronouns are she, her, and I think these are going to be shared a couple of the identities about me that I think are relevant to why I was invited to speak here today, but also what I'm hoping might be a point of connection, connectivity, sense of community that you might find in me and others in this room. I identify as a mom, a sister, a friend, a third culture kid. I'm a racialized fundraising leader, speaker, researcher, and facilitator. I'm the co-founder of Recast Philanthropy. I'm a volunteer, a prolific volunteer, I would say, with the Advisory Committee on the Charitable Sector, AFP Canada, CAGP, Find Help, the list goes on. I'm the Executive Director of Development at the Faculty of Arts and Yellowhead Institute and at Toronto Metropolitan University. I am a prolific code switcher. I am deeply achievement-oriented, and I'm a dedicated home baker. I hope that there will be something in there that will be a point of connection for all of us. So I was invited to provide some perspective on the question, as a sector, who are we serving? And I have a few observations. The first, money can't catalyze nothing. We need something worth catalyzing to create impact and public benefit. But yet, even in a venue such as this, we focus our conversations on the strategies focused on fundraising. How do we get more access to resources, rather than talking about creating impact or the causes themselves? The second would be reducing taxable income. We all talk about this, especially in this room. But we know that the government is the largest funder of the charitable and nonprofit sector, and we need the tax base to support vital programs and services across all parts of our sector. And thus that revenue, that tax revenue, is deeply needed to support these expenditures. So on the one hand, we encourage folks to donate to reduce their taxable income, and on the other hand, we absolutely need that tax to support our organizations. We are hyper-connected more than ever, but there is crushing social isolation, even in our philanthropic organizations. Folks feel marginalized, tokenized, and disparate from their colleagues, even when they're recruited for their lived experiences and intersectional identities. The fourth, public benefit. That is the test for whether an organization meets that litmus test for the CRA to become a charitable organization. But philanthropic resources are often dispersed in ways that are opaque, difficult to access, and can often seek and advance the agendas and perpetuate the worldviews and theory of change of private citizens who may not represent the broader populace. And then, of course, EDI, reconciliation, indigenization, decolonization, and reclamation. These are words and values that I've heard bandied about today, but in our sector more generally. But how often are these values explicitly centered in our discussions with funders and donors? And how much are we doing to address the structural disparities that makes realizing these values possible? So I'm sure many of you have heard, and frankly, all of my co-speakers have spoke about this polycrisis, but it's really a term used to describe interacting crises that result in harms greater than the sum that each of the individual crises on their own would produce in isolation. And you need more than one hand, or frankly two, to name the number of crises that are affecting people these days. Cost of living, climate emergencies, global conflict, the after effects of COVID-19, mental health, rising isms, fascism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, transphobia, homophobia, the list goes on. Loneliness, crushing loneliness that we all know to be a deep, deep concern in our communities. And technology, and of course, the rise of AI. The list can go on and on and on, and it's not exhaustive. I'm sorry if I haven't covered everything. But in the age of polycrisis, where problems feel so big and overwhelming, we become more motivated to see and be part of something that we want to change. And local impact, something that we can see, something that we can touch, that we can hear, knowing we are doing something positive, I think is imperative to sustaining the momentum in this work that can feel deeply, deeply, deeply overwhelming and crushing. So this is my son. I had to throw in a photo of him because I miss him terribly, and I will need to do a selfie to demonstrate to him why I was away from him for his bedtime last night. So the question, who are we serving? Well, I think we're serving our collective futures. And what is the solution to the imputable challenges of our generation? Well, I think hope. Hope that is rooted in truth, though. We have to look forward to ourselves, our loved ones, and people across the globe to keep our future squarely in the center. I've heard the debate, and I'm sure many of you have, what's more important, systemic racism or climate? Well, what kind of question is that? It's not fair, it's not important. The answer is always and not or. It's hard to hold these things true. It's hard to acknowledge all of the issues and combat it all with all the solutions that are needed. But we must. If we don't come from a place of hope that is rooted in truth, we aren't doing our jobs. We aren't serving anyone right now, let alone in the future. So how can we serve hope? Well, I have 4 potential ideas that I hope might resonate. One, eschew the guilt and fear. Don't come from a place of fear or guilt. You can't sustain that in the long term. A scarcity mindset is a recipe for burnout, and I know many of us in this room have been there. In my work raising funds for the Yellowhead Institute, an Indigenous-led think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University, we take a values-based approach to developing partnership, meaning the team considers the past and current relationships a donor has with Indigenous communities, their labor practices, the nature of their wealth creation, and their understanding of the impacts of their wealth creation methods, and whether or not it's a partnership that we want to enter into and a relationship that we want to cultivate. And it has actually done nothing to hinder our growth, but rather led to the largest philanthropic investments in Yellowhead's work and some of the largest grants writ large to support Indigenous policy and research in Canada to date. The second, build your community. And at the beginning, I shared a little bit about my identities. It's not all-encompassing of who I am, but finding and building your community is imperative. Find the people that inspire you and work to support them. Community is an ultimate currency, and at Recast Philanthropy, we've consciously created a community of practice for fundraisers, nonprofit professionals, and funders to have meaningful conversations that are focused on strategies to address the power imbalances and inequity that we all know to be true in this sector. We cover everything from driving equity, strategies for internal advocacy, redefining donor diversity, doubling down on unrestricted funding, rolling back on martyrdom, having difficult conversations with donors, calling in versus calling out, and many, many more. And we've built a community that's been focused on solutions and bolstering one another as we continue to do this work in anti-oppressive and sustainable ways without burning out. Number 3, look up and look out. Cultivate a practice of looking beyond the next email or deadline and out to what you want to achieve in the long term. In my work as a board chair of Find Help, we operate 2-on-1 service coast to coast to coast. We were compelled to leverage our capacity and referral services to the growing mental health crisis. Rather than being paralyzed by the calls to action to defund the police and to the enormity of the mental health crisis in Toronto, we were focused on supporting greater access to culturally competent, compassionate, and high-touch emergency mental health and crisis supports. I'm proud to share that it is now the 2-year anniversary of the Toronto Community Crisis Service pilot, which is now going to be rolled out across the City of Toronto as of yesterday, and will provide a roadmap for other jurisdictions on developing a 4th municipal emergency service in addition to ambulance, fire, and police. So look up and look out. What is your North Star? And then 4th, cultivate your collective wisdom. Do your part in building that collective knowledge trust. Big, intractable challenges take many minds, hearts, and hands to solve. In my research on gift acceptance policies and practices done in collaboration with CAGP and Carleton's MP&L program, we uncovered that while institutions are speaking with fervor about EDI, justice, reconciliation, and the list goes on, these values are not codified anywhere in their policies and practices. And so rather than just reporting these findings, we developed a fulsome set of recommendations for the philanthropic and charitable sector on how to embed these values and other important values into your policies and practices. This research was possible due to the generosity of dozens of colleagues, including many in this room, that we interviewed in the sector. And our output was a contribution back to the sector that we love and are part of. A reminder not to do it alone, but to seek wisdom from others and to share generously in return. So hope wins. I know that many of us spoke about hope, but truly, truly, if you knew even a tenth of what I've been through in the last 2 years, I think you would know that hope absolutely wins. Optimism always wins. And it is us in the broader sector that have the influence to shift power and resources in support of the public benefit and community impact that we want to see. And I leave you with a favorite quote from Richard Wagamese. Nothing in the universe ever grew from the outside in. So there's no one else. We are the room. There's no one else that we can turn to. It is indeed us that has the influence to create the kind of change that we want to see. Thank you very much.